Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tarek Zeidan, and I'm the Executive Director of Helem, which is the first LGBT rights organization in the Arab world. As you might imagine, life as a queer person in the MENA region can be quite bleak. And queer people are disproportionately affected by issues such as homelessness, violence, arbitrary arrest and detention, sexual assault, barriers to employment, barriers to medication, sanitation, you name it. The list is truly endless. I'm not here, however, to list all of these challenges that's facing our community, because I'm sure so much sensationalized victimization on this subject has reached your screens already, especially in terms of how gay and trans people are constantly attacked because they live in a region that's conservative and backwards, that's rife with guns and religious zealotry, which often go so well together. Unfortunately, in this process, our community doesn't just get marginalized by its government, it also gets marginalized by this coverage, which paints us and our fight as a separate struggle and a unique struggle away from the greater socio-political reality of the region. This is Madonna being portrayed as Madonna, holding a baby JC. This collage was taken from an article on a blog written back in 2015 on the subject of male gay iconography. And it was shared on Facebook by this guy, Hamid Sinno, who is an openly queer lead singer of the extremely popular Lebanese band Mashra Leila. This article went undisturbed for 4 years on his Facebook page until July 17, 2019, when a mysterious and previously unknown group of people on Facebook calling themselves the Soldiers of the Lord began a vicious attack against him and the band because they claimed that they were defiling sacred Christian icons and spreading vice through demonic lyrics and homosexual lifestyle. Sinno and the band members received death threats. Some were detained and questioned by authorities. And their concert, planned for September in their own home country, was canceled. The band had been down this route before. They'd been banned from performing in Jordan before, and more recently in Egypt, after their last concert there on September 22nd in 2017 was their last, because fans raised the rainbow flag during the performance. And that set off one of the worst ever crackdowns on the history's queer community. Dozens of people were arrested and charged with debauchery. Now, incidents like this may seem like business as usual in the region, but the Lebanese case that we just spoke of brought up some interesting observations. Why now? Why after 4 years? Why this post in particular rose to national attention? It didn't take long for one to notice that at the same time as the smear campaign began, the Lebanese parliament was set to meet and pass what was referred to as the most austere budget in Lebanon's history. This included unpopular income taxes on pensions, but did not include a reduction of salaries of all current and previous living members of parliament. The budget was deeply unpopular in Lebanon, which is a country that's already experiencing one of the worst financial crises in its history, and has one of the highest ratios of GDP to debt in the world at 152%. However, the parliamentary session was passed with relatively little incident, as most activists were too busy protesting and denouncing the Mashra Leila brouhaha. The coincidence forced us to re-examine other possible parallels around the region, focused around high-profile LGBT-related crackdowns. And we found several. In Egypt, for example, we found that in December 2014, a sting operation by Egyptian authorities saw the raid of the Ramses bathhouse, where 26 men were arrested, detained, and then subjected to rectal examinations to ascertain their sexual orientation. This raid was the biggest in Egypt since 2001, which was the infamous Queen Boat incident that also contributed in the creation of Helem. And it was entirely televised on the popular Egyptian show Al-Mustakhabbi in full view of the public. Curiously, around the same time, in the same two-week period, Egypt's highest court overturned the only remaining conviction against former President Hosni Mubarak. Again, in April 2015, Egyptian authorities issued a ban on all LGBT foreigners from entering the country. Around the same time as the judiciary announcing that ousted President Mohamed Morsi would be sentenced to 20 years in prison for his role in the arrest and torture of protesters during his time as president. Both decisions were extremely unpopular with large and different swaths of the Egyptian population. So, what's going on here? Is this a mere coincidence? Is it a coincidence that these events are taking place in close proximity to one another with massive media coverage in countries where the ruling regime controls the majority of that coverage? Is this another Middle Eastern conspiracy theory? Maybe it is. But maybe these regimes know exactly what they're doing. Maybe they know that sex is an extremely effective, all-purpose distraction. And if you want to pass a particularly sensitive and inflammatory law or policy, then gay sex, in particular, delivers a really good bang for the buck, pun intended, and generates enough obsession and outrage from the populace to dominate the national discussion. The facts seem to agree with this. In Lebanon, crackdowns against LGBT organizing began to sharply rise in early 2017, a few months after the current unpopular president was sworn into office. The Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights reported in 2017 that the average number of persons arrested and referred to trial in LGBT cases has increased 5-fold since the last quarter of 2013 in comparison with previous years. It's no coincidence that 2013 is the year when the current Egyptian regime came into power after a coup d'etat against the overthrown President Morsi. Attacking and demonizing queer lives and queer bodies serves a double purpose. It creates a threatening and alien other, which is us, and also sets up the state as a custodian of certain family values and links, therefore, its own viability and longevity to its ability to create moral panic and then resolve it by subjugating that imagined enemy, also us. The way this hegemony is practiced, however, has nothing to do with sex. That's really too simple of a reading. It actually has to do with one of the reasons why we're all gathered here today, probably with the reason why the foundation began in the first place. It has to do with freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is not just about free speech. Gender expression is also central to understanding and safeguarding that freedom. When a trans woman walks out the door wearing clothes that reflect her identity, she is exercising freedom of expression. When she moves, she talks. She exists in public. She's also exercising that freedom. This is something very important to recognize in order to be able to understand how the modern state exercises power by regulating bodies. We know that states already exercise power by regulating women's bodies, particularly their reproductive organs. But what we don't know is that they also seek to regulate queer bodies by regulating their gender expression, and therefore the attention of an entire nation. That freedom should not be regulated by the state. It should be under the control of queer people themselves. We choose when to be visible and when not to be visible. The state seeks to destroy our agency by taking that decision away from us. They seek to regulate expression in a way that suits their own purposes at our expense. In Lebanon, The state does not raid gay clubs. It instead closes down LGBT conferences. The massive majority of arrests do not happen because people are caught engaging in same-sex relations. They're done arbitrarily on the street, when mostly femme men and trans women are seen expressing their gender and are therefore arrested because it does not suit the Lebanese state's interests to allow them to be visible. In Egypt, it's the opposite. Queer people are raided. They're entrapped by the state using dating apps like Grindr, precisely because it's their privacy that does not suit the Egyptian state's purposes. Understanding LGBTQ persecution through the lens of sexual freedom is really insufficient. For LGBT rights are not tangential, they are central for the fight of freedom of expression and human rights in the world. We queer people have come to understand this recently, and we've begun to base our long and difficult fight for justice and equality on it. This year, Egyptian activists commemorated the rainbow flag raising incident at the Mashra Layla concert with the hashtag Lamma Dhaharna, which means when we appeared. And it really tells you all you really need to know. It tells you clearly that that moment in Egyptian history was a turning point, precisely because it was the moment that queer Egyptians decided to express themselves by themselves according to what they wanted, not according to what the state wanted. By their own hand, they regained the control away from the state. In Lebanon, queer people have not just supported the ongoing revolution, they're in the thick of it, not demanding the removal of anti-sodomy laws, but demanding economic and social rights that are identical to those of the broader movement. They were marching, blocking roads, setting up tents in the middle of the square, and there we go, blanketing the walls of the city with slogans that defied any authority to silence them. What this tells us is that the paradigm is shifting in the MENA region. What this tells us is that new battle lines and new public narratives are being born as we speak, within and despite the bleakest of realities. I personally cannot know how long and how far we need to go to free our bodies and our lives, for them to be our own again. But I do know is that we're no longer just defending ourselves. We've begun to fight. And when we begin to fight, know that we begin to win.